Hey guys, welcome back to the Maranatha Global Bible Study on the Book of Revelation. In this session, we're continuing our previous discussion as to whether or not the city of Jerusalem is the great harlot spoken of in the Book of Revelation. Of course, Jerusalem in this case would be a symbol or a representation not only of the Jewish people but of Judaism itself. And of course, this is actually a fairly common interpretation among Christians. There are many who believe that the city of Jerusalem, again, which represents the Jewish people in Judaism, is the great harlot of the book of Revelation. And in last week's session, we began a few sessions here where we are debunking, or at the very least challenging, what I believe to be an incredibly dangerous false premise. So in this session, we're going to continue that discussion. Before we jump in, just want to remind you all that this summer, July 13th, 14th, and 15th, we are hosting the Maranatha End Time Summit down in Dallas, Texas. We do hope to see you all there. For more information, for registration, go to maranathaSummit.com. Okay, so in this session, as I said, we're going to continue the discussion from last week. What we did last week is we debunked the concept of a Jewish antichrist. We debunked the idea that the antichrist himself will be Jewish and that his religion, his false belief system, that he will ride or utilize, so to speak, to gain control over many nations of the earth, is Judaism. So we debunked that. We showed that from the beginning, the biblical narrative tells the story of an ongoing historical conflict from the very beginning, from the fall. The Bible tells the story of an ongoing conflict between the descendants of the woman, that's Eve in the garden, and the descendants of the serpent. And this story plays out throughout the pages of the Bible. The people, the seed, the descendants of Eve are, as we learn in the book of Genesis, they come through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is Israel. Israel becomes the ethnic house, if you will, for the people of God, the righteous ones. Now, it's not only ethnic Jews by any means. It has always included anyone who attaches themselves, who grafts themselves into that particular storyline, that particular people, this particular way of life, this covenant. Okay, on the other hand, you have the descendants of the serpent. And as we discussed, whether it was Egypt trying to wipe out all of the firstborn children of Israel, or the Assyrians invading the northern tribes and dragging away 10 of the northern tribes, killing the majority and dispersing the rest, or Babylon, or Medo-Persia with Haman, or the Greek Empire under Alexander, which eventually brought forth Antiochus Epiphanes, really the single greatest. Antiochus Epiphanes, the whole story about 250 years before Jesus, the whole story of Maccabees, this Greek Seleucid king that invades the land of Israel, makes Judaism illegal. He is, and this is important, we didn't even touch on this last week just because we ran out of time, Antiochus Epiphanes is the single greatest, most emphasized type of the Antichrist in the entire Bible. And he was not Jewish. He was very much a Gentile. So whether we're talking, actually, the two greatest types of the Antichrist are Nebuchadnezzar, a pagan Gentile, a Goy king from Babylon, or Antiochus Epiphanes, a Greek king. These are the two greatest types of the Antichrist, both Gentiles. All of the primary Antichrist figures throughout Scripture are always pagan, heathen, Gentile kings and rulers, hostile adversarial rulers that invade the land of Israel. Okay, so throughout history, you've had the people, the seed line, the descendants of the serpent, those who follow the ways of their father, the devil. They have been adversarial, hostile against God's people. This is the story that the Scriptures are telling, which culminates in the book of Revelation. And so in this session, I want to begin by discussing this very concept, which is to say the power of narrative, the power of story. because the Bible uses it. The Bible tells multiple different storylines, and it has a beautiful way of interweaving all of them together. And of course, humans, as children of our Creator, we are also very good storytellers. And so probably, I would say, one of the most iconic, classic examples of a story which captures the emotion, the heart, the attention of anyone who reads it is the story of David and Goliath. I mean, this thing has everything. It has the underdog, the underappreciated little brother. He's shorter, he's younger, he's not as good looking or tall as his brothers and so forth, but the Lord sees his heart, and the Lord, by his power, uses this little one to kill the giant, to kill the big, mocking, adversarial, pagan giant, and ultimately cut off his head. And every person out there that identifies as a bit of an underdog stands up and cheers and says, "Yeah, David, we did it." You know, they see themselves as David. Now, this is sort of a classic example of a story, and you can retell that exact same story, but plug in different information. So I think a fantastic example of this is a movie from the early part of last century called Inherit the Wind. And it's a movie that actually is mocking and making fun of Christians. And in the story, you basically have this very likable, young, non-religious school teacher who believes in evolution. And he actually goes to court to fight for the right to teach evolution as opposed to creationism in class. And so this young teacher is framed as the David character. He's the young underdog who's going up against the system, the big religious system. And of course, he's more intelligent and more thoughtful and this type of thing. And so everyone identifies. Even if you're a Christian, you watch the movie, you're naturally going to be emotionally swayed because you don't want to identify with the controlling, angry, all of the angry white men, so to speak, that control the town. You want to identify with the young rebel, right? The young teacher who's just trying to teach truth and this type of thing. Whoever controls the narrative wins. Do you hear what I'm saying? So not only is there incredible power in storytelling, but there is incredible power for whoever controls the narrative. And as much as the Bible tells a narrative, this ongoing conflict between the people whose hearts are possessed by the ways, by the thoughts, by the plans of the serpent versus those whose hearts are given over to the plans, thoughts, and ways of the Lord, as much as that story plays out through Scripture, it culminates, it's brought full circle in the book of Revelation. So that which began in Genesis comes to its fullness in the book of Revelation, which is to say what? Which is to say Israel as a people and all of those who have attached themselves to the King of Israel, to the covenants of Israel, to the people of Israel, to the God of Israel. They are hated and persecuted by the seed line of the serpent. They are hated and persecuted by the people of the devil. It's actually a very simple, straightforward narrative. And you go, okay, that's easy to understand. I get that. The problem is this. The problem is that the majority of the Jewish people have rejected Jesus. So as Christians, as New Testament Christians, as Christian theologians, we go, oh, hold on, the Bible has a lot of really critical things to say about Israel in their unbelief, in their rejection of the Messiah. And so on one hand, you're telling me that the Bible tells this story of God's people, of which Israel is really the ultimate sort of ethnic embodiment of God's people. Again, it's not the only way that God's people are identified by any means. Throughout Galatians, throughout Romans, Paul talks a lot about how anyone who has the same faith as Abraham, and of course Abraham was before Israel, right? He's the great-grandfather of Israel, or he's the grandfather of Israel. If whoever has the same faith as Abraham, they are spiritual children of Abraham, and thus they are inheritors, they are heirs of the promises. In so many ways, the spiritual promises made to Israel. You go, okay, all right, so it's much bigger than just Israel, but still, it is much bigger than Israel, but still, Israel is continually referred to as God's people. Like right up until the end, even in their unbelief, they are still referred to as God's people. We talked about this last week. In Joel chapter 3, the current present day people of Israel who are invaded are referred to as God's people. He identifies with them. Again, this is challenging because Christians go, how can you say they're God's people if the majority don't even believe in Jesus? And the answer is, they are the way that we should view them. If we understand the story, if we understand the way the Bible is telling the story, they are essentially backslidden children. How would you, as a parent, relate to your children if they were backslidden? You don't treat them as though they're serving the Lord with gladness and strength. Of course, you don't lie about that, but you are continually praying. You're continually interceding. You are believing for the day when they will come back to the Lord. Now, in the case of Israel, God has promised the day is coming when all Israel will be saved. When he returns, when they look upon the one they have pierced, all of corporate Israel will be saved. It describes it in Zechariah 12. It says, they will look upon me, the one they have pierced, and they will weep, and the Lord will pour out his spirit of grace and supplication. In Matthew 24, verse 30, Jesus tells us the order of how this goes down. He says, then they will see the sign of the Son of Man in the sky, in the clouds, and they will weep, all the tribes of the earth, or all the tribes of the land. Zechariah 12 told us it's the inhabitants of Jerusalem. It's the tribes. It's the clans of Israel. That's the original context of what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 24. It tells us all of the tribes of Israel, all of the tribes of the land. Yes, it may be much more than that. It may be all the peoples, all the tribes of the earth. But the original context is the tribes of Israel. When they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds, they weep, they repent, and there is a corporate time of salvation. So the Bible frames Israel as backslidden. We don't want to deny that. We don't want to miss that. But we don't want to stop there and say that's the end of the story. The Lord says, no, there's much more to the story because God himself is faithful to his promises. He has promised the day is coming when all of Israel would be his, when he would be their God and they would be his people. And so the verse in Romans 11, verse 25, Paul the Apostle captures this story about Israel quite well. He says, I don't want you, brothers, I don't want you Christian brothers and sisters to be ignorant, to be uninformed. As I said before, ignorance is not a bad thing. It's not a bad word in my book. I am ignorant of way more things than I am knowledgeable of. We all are. Ignorance is fine. Everyone's ignorant. We're all ignorant of many, many things. But Paul says, don't be ignorant about this issue. This is so important that you don't hide your head in the sand. You don't ignore it. You don't say, well, that's a peripheral issue. I don't need to understand Israel. I'm saved, and that's all that matters. Paul goes, I don't want you to be ignorant or uninformed about this unfolding mystery. And it is a bit of a mystery. The majority of Israel has rejected Jesus, but then when all is said and done, they all will turn to him and they all will be his. And it's kind of this unfolding long historical story. And it is a bit of a mystery. And then Paul says this. He goes, I don't want you to be ignorant because if you are, it would be very easy, he says, so that you will not become wise in your own eyes, in your own estimation, that you wouldn't think more highly of yourself than you should. You wouldn't exalt yourself. And especially that you would not look down on Israel because they're in unbelief. He says, this is what you all need to know. A partial hardening has happened to Israel. A partial. It's not a complete. It's not a full hardening. And then he says this, and when will this hardening stop? When will it be lifted? He says, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. So the Lord himself says that he hardened Israel. There has been a hardening to Israel, but it's two things. It's partial, which is to say it has not affected the entirety of Israel. It's only partial. So you can never say Israel is rebellious because you go, part of Israel is rebellious, but part's not. Only a partial hardening has happened. There's always been a remnant of Israel. There's always been a remnant of Messianic Jewish believers. There always has been. And he says it's temporary. So this blindness, this rejection of Jesus, according to, again, Paul the Apostle, according to the New Testament scriptures, according to the entirety of the Bible, Israel has temporarily rejected Jesus, but it's not permanent, and Israel's rejection of Jesus is only partial. Okay, so there's the story. That's what we need to understand. Currently, the majority are backslidden. Presently, the majority are in unbelief, but the day is coming when they all will be saved. That's the basic storyline. This is the storyline that the book of Revelation tells about Israel, about Jerusalem, about the Jewish people. Yes, they are God's people. They have been temporarily, partially hardened, but when all is said and done, they will all come to Him. Now, with that said, as we discuss this idea, this belief system, that Jerusalem is the great harlot, okay, there's really going to be two different groups of people in the church, two different groups of Christians that believe this. The first group are called futurists. Okay, that's what I am. I'm a futurist, which is to say I believe the majority of biblical prophecy will be fulfilled in the future, in the last days, just before the return of Jesus. Ultimately and primarily within this final 7-year window of time before the return of Jesus, of which the final 3.5 years is biblically referred to technically as the Great Tribulation. Okay, so that is what a futurist is. A futurist believes the majority of the book of Revelation, the prophecies of Daniel, the overwhelming burden of the prophets. It's the future. Okay, we're going to discuss among the futurists who believe that Jerusalem is Babylon, which again, it's not. I just want to be very clear. It's not. Like, this is a brazen, it's a very common, but it is a brazen misinterpretation of the prophecy. We're going to continue discussing that, the futurist interpretation, next week. Today, I want to discuss the other group that believe this, which are called the preterists. What is preterism? What is a preterist? What is preterism? Well, preterism, or preterists who believe in preterism, this comes from the word preter, which simply means past, history. Okay, so the idea of preterism is that the majority of the book of Revelation, the prophecies of Daniel, etc., the burden of most biblical prophecy was pointing to and ultimately fulfilled in the past, in the first century, primarily in the events that surrounded the invasion, the siege, the invasion, the destruction, and the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Okay, so there is a pretty significant segment in the church, again, theologians and students of Scripture who are preterists. They believe that all of these prophecies were fulfilled in 70 AD. Okay, so for the preterists, the idea is it's the Jerusalem of the first century that was the great harlot. They wouldn't say it is today. Today they would say Jerusalem is just sort of a historical relic. You know, it really has no greater prophetic significance than Irian Jaya. I mean, like any other nation or city or any place in the world, Papua New Guinea, Canada, Ottawa, Edmonton, like you name it, they all pretty much have equal relevance. Obviously, Jerusalem has much more biblical history, but in terms of its prophetic significance, that's all gone and past. Okay, so that's what preterists would say. Now, let me just say this, again, with regard to the power of narrative. A few of the primary names, theologians, who teach this. Okay, the first and probably most well-known is the highly respected theologian who passed away just a few years ago, R.C. Sproul. A lot of people love R.C. Sproul, great Bible teacher, but he was an amillennialist, and he did believe in preterism, and he did believe in replacement theology. Replacement theology, of course, is the idea that God has replaced Israel as the people of God, that the church is the new Israel, and we are the new people of God. We have replaced Israel. That's replacement theology, also known as supersessionism. So R.C. Sproul, again, a great Bible teacher, and all of these guys are brothers, I want to be clear. But what he taught with regard to Israel, again, the belief that first century Jerusalem was the great harlot, is a profoundly unbiblical, and I'm even going to say evil doctrine. It's an evil doctrine. Probably the next most significant, most well-known theologian that teaches this is New Testament scholar. A lot of people say he's the greatest New Testament scholar in the world, is British Anglican author, teacher. I think he's still a vicar. I might be wrong, but N.T. Wright, Tom Wright. A lot of people are familiar with him. He's been prolific in writing over the past 30 years. Hank Hanegraaff was I think he still is the Bible Answer Man. I might be wrong. I don't know if he still has that program or not. A lot of people know the name Hank Hanegraaff. He was, for many, many years, the Bible Answer Man, very popular Christian radio program. In more recent years, he actually converted to Eastern Orthodoxy, which was a pretty big shock for a lot of people. But for years, he has taught that the Jerusalem of the first century was the great harlot. Another guy named David Chilton, he was a very prominent preterist author. He died pretty young, quite a few years ago. Today, there's a guy, not many people know him. He's a hyper-preterist. His name is Don Preston. He's written a whole book on this issue. When I say hyper-preterist, what I mean is, and this is interesting, so among preterists, again, they believe that the majority of the book of Revelation and all biblical prophecy was fulfilled in the first century. You have what are called partial preterists and full preterists. Partial preterists actually say that the antichrist, the mark of the beast, the great tribulation, all of those things are past. The fall of Jerusalem, Babylon, etc., those things are all past. But they would still hold that in the future, sometime, Jesus is going to return. And a big part of the reason they teach that is because the historical creeds of the Christian church have always held from the beginning that the day is coming in the future when Jesus will return. He is seated at the right hand of the Father. From thence he will come again to judge the living and the dead. So he's coming back from heaven. If you deny that Jesus is coming back, if you try to say he's already come, then you have literally denied the Nicene Creed, like the Apostles' Creed, some of the earliest, most foundational creeds that have defined Christianity from the very beginning. And arguably, you're not even a Christian anymore. If you say that Jesus has already returned mystically, invisibly, and that we shouldn't await his future return, technically, you're not even really a Christian anymore. You have denied one of the most essential, foundational beliefs, tenets of the historic Christian faith. Don Preston, believe it or not, teaches just that. And you do have a very small segment of people who identify as Christians. I would actually argue that they're not even Christians. You know, they're going to say all the right things. They're going to, name the name of Jesus, but they deny, as I said, the blessed hope. They actually deny the blessed hope itself and say Jesus mystically, invisibly came in judgment against Jerusalem, and that's all the prophecies we're talking about. Don Preston and other full preterists would actually say we are already in the new heavens and the new earth. Okay, so that's kind of a side issue, but I thought I would mention that. Also, Roman Catholic theologian, a guy named Scott Hahn, author, teacher. He's pretty popular in the Roman Catholic world. Of course, he doesn't want to teach that Rome is Babylon, so he teaches Jerusalem is Babylon. Now, let me just say this with regard to the guys that teach this, and again, the power of narrative. This is very important and it's worth mentioning. The young men and women, and believe me, the numbers are shrinking drastically because the church in the West is imploding, it's hemorrhaging. The young men and women today who are, the majority are young. I'm sure there's plenty that are a bit older that are in seminary. But the young men and women who are in seminary today, who are training and preparing to either be pastors or to be in ministry or to be missionaries. As I said, let's say the majority of them are college age, in their early or mid-20s. The younger someone is, quite frankly, I don't care how godly you are, the more influenced you are by simple style. By simple style. And so I would love it if I just said, no, like whoever has the best biblical argument, they will win. They will win the war, so to speak. But it doesn't work that way. Oftentimes, whoever controls the propaganda war, whoever controls the narrative wins. So when you take this particular issue, you take the issue of Israel, how we relate to Israel, like what we believe, our theology, what we believe. People go like, Joe, you're talking about Is Jerusalem Mystery Babylon, is this really a big, important issue? Yes, absolutely. What we believe about this will very much affect the way that we relate to and treat Jews today. It will affect the way we pray. It will affect the way we do sharing the gospel, all sorts of things. This is demonstrable down throughout history. Christians that had false ideas about Israel, who instead of saying, well, it's a backslidden child that will eventually come back to the Lord, those who said, no, they have been cut off forever, permanently. The logic is, well, if they've been cut off and rejected, and if God's wrath rests on them forever, then I should treat them horribly too. That logic has played out in history in relationships between Christians and the Jewish community a million times, and the Jews are very well aware of it. What we believe about these things matters. Ideas lead to actions. Our beliefs affect the way we live. Okay, so you get your average student who is in seminary, and he looks out. He's going, okay, I've got different options here. One group says that Israel is still God's beloved, that he has not forsaken them. They are still his people. Yes, they're currently backslidden, but the day is coming when they all will turn to him. And then on the other hand, you have this other group that says, no, actually, they rejected God, and God therefore rejected them. And he has now turned and flung wide the barn doors open to the Gentiles. And now we, by grace, have been brought in, but Israel is no longer relevant. Okay, they go, here's two very different storylines. But the guy who is articulating the view that Israel has been permanently rejected, probably the most notable, most well-known guy, is N.T. Wright. This very eloquent, incredibly intelligent Anglican British vicar, who with just an incredible broad-ranging grasp of just all sorts of different disciplines. I mean, he can just sit there and just eloquently flow from talking about theology to history to biology and make a joke and then throw in a comment about how he's sipping gin as he's writing this theological work. And again, he's very soft-spoken and eloquent. And you get your average 22-year-old, and forgive me for using stereotypes here, but you get your 22-year-old American coffee-sipping hipster theologian, a wannabe theologian who's going to seminary, who's going to be a pastor in 4 years. And he listens to N.T. Wright. Again, he's very eloquent, this British. And then on the other hand, he goes, well, who's the main one that's supporting Israel? And he goes, let's see, we got John Hagee. He's a Texas Baptist pastor or Pentecostal pastor. I'm not sure if he's Baptist or Texas. And forgive me, but let's just be honest. The youth are very much influenced by these things. He's a heavy Southern white male, an older Southern white Baptist guy who talks with an accent, and he says, God and America and Israel. You know what I mean? Like this type of thing. And they, again, young people very much influenced by style, they look at that and they go, I think I'm going to go with N.T. Wright. Not based on the substance of what he is saying, not based on whether or not what he is arguing for is more biblical, but they just go, I identify with that guy.
We're interrupting the teaching for just a moment, but don't worry, we'll be back. We just wanted to draw your attention to Emmaus Online. Emmaus Online is our flagship online training program. Regardless of your location or your vocation, you can go deep with a company, a family of like-minded believers who want to live this life burning with a burning heart, as hot as the human heart can burn in this age before the Lord returns. If this is something that's of interest to you, go check it out at faistudios.org.
And so what I'm saying here is that in terms of this theological conflict within the body of Christ, those who say God has rejected Israel forever, N.T. Wright, R.C. Sproul, Hank Hanegraaff, and those who say that God is not done with Israel, John Hagee, myself, Dalton Thomas, Michael Brown, Dr. Michael Brown, like a whole host of other folks. When you get your average 22-year-old seminary student, they go, John Hagee, N.T. Wright. They're going to go with N.T. Wright every time, and they're going to identify with what he teaches because they like his style better. And believe me, whoever controls the narrative, one is framed as sort of the thoughtful, eloquent, highly educated British guy who understands and he waxes eloquent about the suffering of the Palestinian people and this type of thing, right? That story is, again, this is this highly educated, thoughtful, worldly guy. You know, he's been around the world. He has all, versus this sort of, they're going to frame him as the ignorant hayseed hick, white guy, overweight with a hillbilly accent. And again, this, I'm not saying I believe this about John Hagee. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying the judgmental, coffee-sipping, 22-year-old seminary student overwhelmingly is going to be influenced and go after the anti-rights of the world, okay? Whoever controls the narrative wins. Whoever controls the narrative wins. Now, the book of Revelation tells a narrative. It tells a very clear narrative. It tells a clear story, and it is a story of two women. It is a story of two very different women. I want to just read a couple scriptures here. I'll actually flash up a picture here. So on one hand, you have Jerusalem. One woman is called Jerusalem. Revelation 12, 1 through 7. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she's pregnant. She's with child. She cries out, being in labor. And then the dragon wants to devour this woman. The dragon wants to persecute this woman. The dragon wants to eat her child. She is dressed, later we see, in all white. She descends from heaven dressed like a bride. Look at this. She's clothed with the sun. She's radiating like the shining of the sun. The moon is under her feet. She has a crown of 12 stars. The dragon hates her. It goes on and describes her, again, the woman in white. Then you get to Revelation 17. You have a different woman. It's not Jerusalem. It's Babylon. She's not dressed in white. She's not clothed in the sun. Quite to the contrary. Then one of the seven angels came, and he spoke to me, and he said, I'm going to show you the judgment of the great prostitute. Now, if you're just reading this as narrative, no one says, oh, this prostitute is the woman shining like the sun with a crown of 12 stars that we just read about in chapter 12. No one says it's the same woman. That was Jerusalem. She was portrayed in all positive terms. The enemy, the dragon, hates her. Satan hates her. Here, you have the harlot. She has tremendous influence over many waters, over the Gentiles, over the kings of the earth. She is portrayed as a Gentile prostitute and a queen. She's committing acts of immorality. She's sleeping around. She's whoring around with all the kings and all the peoples of the earth. Again, we've talked about this. She has a golden chalice filled with the filth of her prostitution and the blood of the saints, and she's getting people drunk off of this. And she's not dressed. She's not clothed with the sun. She's clothed in scarlet and purple. She's decked out in gold and jewels, things of the earth, right? Pearls and so forth. The other woman is clothed with things of the heavenly realm. One is Babylon, one is Jerusalem. This is the narrative that the book of Revelation tells. This, again, it's all symbolism. It's all metaphor. But to confuse these two women and to say that actually they're one and the same, to say that Jerusalem is Babylon and Babylon is Jerusalem, is to conflate these two women, these two very different characters, and to miss the entire story that the book of Revelation is telling. Now, I want to read a couple statements, again, from some preterists who believe that Jerusalem is Babylon. The first statement I'll read actually is from N.T. Wright. Now, what N.T. Wright does, again, a very brilliant guy, is he takes the clear, not only the entire narrative, as I said, that's unfolding, this story that unfolds throughout the entire Bible, the story of conflict between the Gentile wicked seed line of the serpent. It's dominated by Gentiles, and yes, there are many unbelieving Jews that become part of this seed line of the serpent, if you will. Jesus said, your father is the devil, you brood of vipers. Right? When he uses that language, that's what he's identifying. He's saying, you're part of the wicked line. Your father is the devil, you brood of vipers. That's what he's saying. He goes, you think that you're safe just because you're an ethnic child of Abraham. That's not how it works. You have to have the faith of Abraham as well. Okay, so you have the unrighteous seed of the serpent, the majority of which are Gentiles, as well as many unbelieving Jews. Whoever is of unbelief is part of that seed line. And on the other hand, you have the seed line of belief, of which really Eve is the mother, and in many ways you could say Abraham is the father. He is the father of faith. And that is the righteous seed line. And that storyline, as I said, culminates in the book of Revelation. So in the book of Revelation, you have the harlot and the dragon, and you have the dragon and the beast, really. The dragon, of course, is, so you have sort of this unholy trinity, okay? You have the dragon, which is Satan. You have the beast, which is his earthly kingdom. And you have the harlot, and they all sort of work together. On the other side, you have the Lord God and his son, and then you have the woman Jerusalem. I mean, really, that's kind of the storyline. I'm not saying the Holy Spirit, I'm not trying to create an extra trinity. That's not the point. But in terms of the story that it's telling, you have these two entities in conflict. If you confuse the two, you'll absolutely botch everything. N.T. Wright, not only does he misunderstand the book of Revelation, but he actually flips the script on the entire biblical narrative. So here's a quote from N.T. Wright. He says, instead of seeing Jerusalem as the victim of pagan aggression or corruption, he says Jesus' reinterpretation of various Old Testament passages, back to his quote, designate Jerusalem herself as Babylon. So he goes, no, Jerusalem is not the symbol of the Jewish people that have been hated and persecuted by Satan down through history. He goes, no, no, no. She actually is Babylon. She is the persecutor. So he says, the Old Testament passages designate Jerusalem herself as Babylon, the enemy of the true people of God, of the covenant God. And thus he concludes, Jerusalem has become Babylon. Jesus and his disciples have become Jerusalem. So this is a pretty sneaky sort of, this is what N.T. Wright is so good at doing. He takes a little tiny sliver of truth, and then he completely flips biblical truth on his head, and he makes it palatable. He makes it acceptable. A little bit of sugar makes the poison go down. This is poison. So he takes the biblical narrative of, again, the story of God's people, hated by the serpent, and he says, no, actually, Israel, they are Babylon. They are the greatest embodiment of satanic activity on the earth that will be forever, perpetually judged and destroyed. Do you see how he has flipped he's trying to control the narrative. He's trying to flip the biblical narrative on its head. Literally subvert the whole thing. And he'll use that language. Jesus subverted all, this type of thing. Here's another statement from a preterist who believes that Jerusalem in the first century was Babylon. This is a man named Joel McDermott. I don't know if he still is. He was the president of a ministry called American Vision. That was with Gary DeMar. And in his book, Jesus versus Jerusalem, here's the quote. Listen to this. Please listen. He says, the old Jewish people were not merely exiled from their kingdom, someday to return. So he says the exile of Israel in the first century, that was not partial. It was not temporary. They were not exiled someday to return. There's no restoration. Do you hear what he's saying? He says, no, this time the kingdom was taken from them and given to who? To the true nation, bearing the fruits thereof. He's talking about the church. Christ created a new bride. So here you have a preterist who's trying to explain to you the biblical narrative. And from his perspective, God is the middle-aged man who decides to turn in his old bride for a new bride, and he creates a new bride, and he throws the old bride away. And forgive me if you're watching this and you've gone through a similar life situation. My point here is not to condemn or shame, but this is the stereotypical picture that everyone loves to hate. And this is not the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible is the covenant-keeping God. The God of the Bible is the God of the book of Hosea. The God of the Bible is the one who says to Hosea, I want you to go marry Gomer. I want you to go marry a prostitute as a prophetic picture so that the world will know what I'm like. I want you to be faithful to her. I want you to love her despite her abuse of you, despite her mistreatment of you. I want you to keep covenant as you bear witness concerning what I'm like. Okay? That's the God of the Bible. When you try to subvert and twist the narrative, you end up framing the God of the Bible as the insecure, middle-aged man going through a midlife crisis who decides, I'm going to turn in my old bride and get myself a new bride simply because I'm bored or because she's just been such a nag or whatever, right? Whatever it might be. She let herself go. I'm just going to get my... Like, everyone in the world goes, that scumbag. And that's what we're framing God to be like. Not we. That's what these guys are framing God to be like. Listen to the language. He says, why would Christ desire to return to the whore he has cast aside and divorced, when he has a pristine bride descending from heaven, clothed in righteousness and uncorrupted by idolatry? And I always have to laugh when I read this, because that just describes the church so well. Uncorrupted by idolatry. Why would he go back? He refers to Israel as the whore. Why would God tell Hosea to stick with Gomer, that whore? Because he was trying to demonstrate what he is like. Guys, understanding this is important. It's essential. And then he finishes, he says he doesn't go back to that whore. He left that whore riding her patron, the beast of Rome. So you can see his interpretation is that Jerusalem is the whore, that first century Rome was the beast, and that they worked together. And he says, and that great mother of harlots suffered the judgment of her whoredom. She was divorced and disinherited. So the idea is that she was rejected forever. She was permanently, forever rejected. Not partially and temporarily hardened until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. No, she was forever rejected. Now, we've seen what N.T. Wright says. We've seen what Joel McDermott says. What did Paul the Apostle say? Romans 11, 1, 2, and then verse 11. God has not rejected his people, has he? May it never be, Paul the Apostle says. Like, of course not. Like, what are you talking about? The God of Israel rejecting Israel? He calls himself the God of Israel. The Messiah is the King of Israel. Jesus was Jewish. Paul goes, I'm Jewish. Like, I'm of the tribe of Benjamin. I mean, he goes, I'm a Hebrew. And then he says, God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. He predestined to be his. He promised by covenant, you will be mine. He says, they did not stumble so as to fall. In other words, they did not go down for the count, to use a boxing analogy. Like, they did not get knocked out permanently. Yeah, they've gone down. They're going to get back up. He says, may it never be. Okay, so you have these Christian theologians, very educated, very intelligent guys. N.T. Wright, Joel McDermott, super smart guys, subverting, twisting, using very intellectual language to twist the biblical narrative on its head. Paul the Apostle says, may it never be. Absolutely not. The storyline is actually pretty straightforward and simple. It's not that difficult. Now, I just want to use the rest of this time to sort of wrap up and explain the multiple problems, logically, biblically, with the preterist interpretation that first century Jerusalem was Mystery Babylon. Now, there's going to be some overlap here that will also reflect the futurist interpretation, which we'll discuss next week. There'll be some overlap, but I'm trying to focus here just on the preterist interpretation. Now, notice this. This is a very important point. People like N.T. Wright, Joel McDermott say God, and Joel said it clearly, they were not exiled someday to return. No, they were permanently rejected. N.T. Wright would say the same thing. God dissolved them as a people. He actually says that in one of his articles, one of his papers. He says God dissolved them as a people. Now, if that's the case, if it was God's will to dissolve them, then what in the world was 1948 all about? What was the restoration of Israel all about? What is the current state of Israel all about? It's as though they created a state in defiance of God, despite his sovereign will It's like they succeeded in accomplishing something that he swore would never happen, according to Joel McDermott, according to N.T. Wright. In other words, it cast the modern state of Israel, it cast the modern Jewish people as the descendants of the great whore, as the descendants of the people that God has permanently rejected. Think about that. I look at you, whatever your last name is, watching this, let's say your last name is Schmidt. I go, you're not the true Schmidt. I am the new Schmidt. You're the old Schmidt. God has rejected you as a Schmidt. You're not anything anymore. You're nobody. You're just to be dispersed, you and your whole family, dispersed among the nations until you just become them and you disappear. I am the new and true Schmidt. Like, that is an evil thing to say to anyone. But here's the thing, guys. Israel has been reestablished. So the preterists, they love to point to 70 AD and say that was the will of God. God judged Jerusalem. And I would say, yes, it was a temporary, partial chastisement. Sometimes I punish my children when they are really disobedient in the hopes of restoring them. The preterists love to point to 70 AD and they go, that was God. And I go, what was 1948? And they go, well, that was not God. I go, no, it was God in 70 AD and 1948 was God. The Lord restored Jerusalem. The Lord restored the Jews back to Israel. The Lord caused the state of Israel to be rebuilt. It was not just a human project. God is sovereign. It was not, they didn't somehow manage to pull one over on God. Okay, so if you follow the preterist logic, it logically infers that the Lord's efforts, the Lord's will to forever punish and exile and disperse the Jewish people failed. And those sneaky Jews beat God. They somehow circumvented his will and his plan. That's the logical inference. You can't get around it. And so then the result is you end up having very negative views about Israel. In fact, N.T. Wright actually says if we support the current state of Israel, this is what he said. He said, we are literally cutting off the branch that we're sitting on. And what he means by that is he says the very thing that is supporting us is the view that God does not support Israel. So if we support Israel, we are shooting ourselves in the foot, so to speak. We are destroying our own foundations. What we believe affects how we act. N.T. Wright's theology says that he can't support the state of Israel because God has forever rejected them. I would say that's an incredibly dangerous position to take, especially in the wake of the Holocaust. While the Bible does, from Moses throughout the prophets, John the Baptist, Jesus to Paul, from the beginning of the Bible to the end, the Bible does have some very harsh things to say to the Jewish people, but these are in-family, in-house, intra-house conflicts. Again, what a brother says to his sister or what a parent says to their child is very different than if a stranger says those same things. So while the Bible does say some very harsh things about rebellious Israel, that segment of Israel that rejects God, the Lord, in a very familiar way, rebukes his children. The Scripture's emphasis, the storyline, the narrative is on Israel's restoration, her ultimate future restoration. Now, if you only focus on the negative and don't understand the future, positive, redemptive storyline of Israel, then you are in incredible danger. I just had a huge conflict. I say a huge conflict on social media with just some random guy. You know, he's commenting, everything seems positive, and then he starts just saying horrible things about Israel. He actually says the Jews created the word Nazi to try to inflame people. I'm like, what in the world is? And then he starts just spewing like horrific anti-Semitism. And he's quoting Scripture. I go, yes, you're quoting Scripture, but you're not quoting the rest of the Scriptures. You can't only cite the negative stuff while ignoring the other side of the coin, the other part of the story. And if you do, you end up exactly where this guy ends up, which is a vehement, like a virulent, anti-Semitic Jew hater. It's evil. It's evil. Despite Israel's shortcomings in the eyes of God, Revelation 11:2, she is still the holy city. right? These anti-Semites, they love to quote Revelation 11:6 that refers to Jerusalem as Sodom and Gomorrah, or I'm sorry, Sodom and Egypt. But they ignore Revelation 11:2 where it calls Jerusalem the holy city. And she's not simply a holy city just because that's what she's always been called. It's because God calls forth those things which are not yet as though they already are. Okay? Israel will be fully holy. And so God looks at Jerusalem, looks at the Jewish people through the eyes of his sovereignty, through the eyes of covenant. And he says, they're holy. They're my people. Yes, currently they're not all his people. The Lord says they will be. All of those that remain will be his. A fatal problem for the preterist view is that Jerusalem simply did not meet its end as described in the prophecy. And this is very important. When you read Revelation 18, which concludes in Revelation 19, the destruction of Babylon the Great is absolute, it's complete, it's total, and it's forever. She is destroyed instantly, completely, totally, and perpetually forever. The problem is Jerusalem's fall in the first century, it unfolded very slowly, gradually, really from, you could say, AD 66 up until 70 when it finally fell. But even then, the Jewish people really didn't fall. There was still a strong remnant, and it was over the next 50 years. It was not until the Bar Kokhba rebellion in the 2nd century that Israel was ultimately really purged of any Jewish people. Jerusalem did not fall in a day, the way the book of Revelation describes. And it says this. It says, then I saw like a great stone, like a millstone cast into the sea. And it says, with such violence will Babylon the Great be cast down, and she will never be found again. Well, guess what, guys? Jerusalem has been rebuilt. Jerusalem, yes, it fell slowly, gradually over a period of time in the 1st and 2nd century. And since then, it has been rebuilt. You can go there today. I can promise you Jerusalem has been rebuilt. It has not been perpetually destroyed forever. In the book of Revelation, Babylon is a smoking ash heap perpetually rising as a memorial and as a testimony to God's judgment against Babylon. Jerusalem has been restored. So you have a glaring problem with reality and the preterist interpretation. The only option is to say, well, yeah, the Bible says it would be destroyed forever, but it doesn't really mean that it would be destroyed forever. In other words, I say what the Bible means, not the Bible. Jerusalem has been rebuilt. It's a thriving metropolis. Preterist interpreters simply cannot account for this drastic discontinuity, this discrepancy. Another very significant problem for the preterist interpretation, as we've already discussed, is that the very term Babylon in the 1st century, we talked about this last week, in 1 Peter 5:13, I believe, 5:13, as well as some other Jewish, Christian, Messianic documents, the Syllabine Oracles, 2nd Esdras from the 1st century, refers to Rome as Babylon. So the idea is, guys, in the 1st century, the church referred to Rome as Babylon, not Jerusalem. And so to try to say, well, no, I mean, like the Christians would have understood this, to use the term Babylon, they would have known that it's actually referring to Jerusalem. No, if you say Babylon in the 1st century, they're probably thinking Rome. That's actually the code word that's used for Rome, Babylon, in 1 Peter 5:13. The idea that this would have been understood by the early church is nonsense. It's nonsense. Both preterists and futurists, again, this is the overlap, they run into a huge wall trying to explain away the fact that Babylon is portrayed as a city of tremendous religious and financial economic influence throughout the earth. So whether we're talking about the 1st century view or the last days view, which again we'll talk about next week, Jerusalem in the 1st century was not this massive glittering city of influence economically or religiously. In fact, in the 1st century, Jerusalem was at the bottom of a roughly 200-year lack of influence. Like, it was not doing well. It had been occupied by the Greeks. It had been beaten down. It had been occupied by the Romans. It was not this pinnacle of shining influence and control that is described in Revelation. Quite to the contrary. The Jerusalem of the 1st century or today cannot be said to be this massive global, like, look, Judaism is influential to the Jews around the world, but Jews make up like less than a sliver of 0.5% of the global population. There's not people converting to Judaism by the millions all over the world. It's not this great shining city of religious influence. And there's not this massive, powerful, people always talk about like the Jewish lobby in Washington. Guys, the Jewish lobby is a joke compared to the Saudi lobby. You look at the amount of money that the Saudi royal family has poured into the pockets of presidents, congressmen and women, influencers in Washington. You look at the numbers compared to the Jewish lobby, it's a joke. It's not even comparable. The suggestion that the city of Jerusalem reigned over the kings and the peoples of the earth, particularly the pagans, it just simply doesn't fit. Like, again, it's a joke. Far from ruling the earth, the first century Jerusalem was occupied, was dominated, and it was eventually trampled by who? The Gentiles. By the Gentiles. Now think about this. Again, the power of narrative. Please hear me. The Bible tells the story of this little people, the Jewish people. Remain faithful to your God. Someday he will come from heaven. He will save you from these hostile, angry Gentiles. He will establish his kingdom from Jerusalem. He'll rule the nations. All the peoples will worship him. But before that happens, there'll be birth pains. Before that happens, there'll be this brief invasion. The Gentiles will try one last time. And when that's done, then the time of the Gentiles will be over. It's a very simple story. To take that story and to say, everything that you've ever dreamed of, everything that you've been praying for, everything that you've been waiting for has been fulfilled. And you go, how was it fulfilled? Well, it was fulfilled when your city was destroyed and most of your people were killed. You go, that's not what we've been waiting for. We've been waiting for the opposite. We've been waiting for our enemies to be judged. We've been waiting to be saved. You go, yep, you guys had it wrong all along. What the scriptures were actually saying is that the Holocaust is what you've been waiting for. The first century invasion of Jerusalem and destruction of Jerusalem is often referred to as the first Holocaust. Now, think of how sick, think of how perverted it would be if I stood up and I said, all prophetic expectation was fulfilled in the Holocaust. You go, what are you talking about? Jewish expectation and hope and longing was fulfilled? Yeah, because what they didn't realize is they're not actually the people of God. They're actually the great whore, and God killed them. And we Christians have received everything they were promised. That's exactly what is being taught. It's disgusting. It's evil. It's from the pit of hell. It is from the pit of hell. Whether you say it of the Shoah, the Holocaust of last century, or of the first century, either way, it's evil. The story is simple. You have backslidden, rebellious Israel. The Lord will break them. He will chastise them. But when all is said and done, he will redeem them. And then there will be one new man, Israel, the Jews, and the Gentiles, the former Gentiles of the earth. We all will be one new man, and together we will worship the King. Where? In Jerusalem. And the knowledge of God will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea, and the former things will be forgotten. That's what we're looking forward to. There is no radical subversion of the story. Stick to the biblical narrative. It's not that complicated. It's actually a pretty straightforward story. The same in terms of Jerusalem's economic influence. It's like a joke to say that first century Jerusalem ruled over the kings of the earth. You can't say that with regard to their religion either. Judaism, yes, it was a voice in the ancient world, but it did not hold sway. It did not control. And Jerusalem by no means did it ride the beast. The Rome was occupying Jerusalem. Jerusalem was not sitting on and riding and controlling Rome. The whole storyline just doesn't work. So anyway, with all that said, I'm going to end right here. Next week, we're going to continue this theme and address the futurist view, the idea that present day or the last days Jerusalem is actually the Great Babylon, and then we'll wrap up this discussion and sort of move on to a different candidate, whether that be the United States or literal Babylon or this type of thing. So amen and amen. I do hope that this was helpful. Look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, guys, God bless you all. Have a great week, and Maranatha.
Hey guys, I want to remind you about our $5 a month giving campaign. If you want to have an impact on the unreached and unengaged of the world, if you want to see the gospel go forth into the 1040 window, it's as simple as giving $5 a month. We like to say you could give up a cup of coffee and change the Middle East. If you're interested in doing so, you can check out the link below. I believe it's faimission.org/donate or faistudios.org/donate. Thank you very much.